Hello and welcome to another video. In today's video we're going to be continuing work on the 1960 Bolens Ride-a-matic front axle. Before we get started today, we had a couple of comments on our previous video on this project with a couple of people telling us that we might have our chain master link clip the wrong way round. Now, we know nothing about chains really, so we had a look at this, and obviously the opening of the master link part is facing this way, which I can see how this can be a problem, because if we move this in the direction of travel, when the tractor's going forwards, you can see the opening bit is at the front, which I assume is bad, because if that's flying around there and something hits it, that could knock that clip off, and then the whole chain can go flying if that comes out. So the only exception to that with this tractor is when you move the Rideamatic into the reverse position, it reverses the drive to this pulley here, which obviously changes the direction. However, reverse is kind of a bit of an exception, and we prefer it to be correct for the majority of the time. So what we're now going to do is flip that round so that it's in the right direction for when the tractor is driving forwards. So thank you to everyone that commented about that. We will quickly fix that, and then we can get on with the front axle today. We've got that master link clip turned around now, so that is as it should be, and we can now move on to the front axle. Thanks again to everyone that commented about that. Again, we don't really know much about chains and stuff, so it's a good thing that you pulled us up on that, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to fix it. But now on to the front axle work today, and we've done a couple of things in preparation for this video because we weren't fully sure how certain things were going to go. Firstly, this bracket on the chassis that holds the front axle on there. Before, that was actually splayed out, so these two parts here, instead of being parallel, were kind of bent outwards like that. So we've got this bolt in here. It's just a random M12 bolt, which is kind of a throwaway bolt that we used just to tighten those two parts up. By just doing up the bolt, that pulled the two things together, and they've stayed there permanently now. And we've got that to the point where these two parts are parallel, as they should be, which has closed up the gap in here and will hopefully remove some of the movement on the front axle, which was probably caused by the front axle moving like this in there to start with. Then after that, we looked at working with our seamless tubing that we introduced in a previous video. Now this end fitted well into the chassis. Obviously the bolt's in there, so I can't show you. But then we cleaned up some of the mill scale on one end to try and see if it would fit in the front axle, and it actually wouldn't at first. So we got this, which is an H6 adjustable reamer, which was brand new, and we put that through there to try to open it up just a tiny bit. And after that, as you can see now, this fits in here well. Not too tight, not too loose, pretty much perfect, seeing as the pivot point for the front axle is meant to be in there. Those two are meant to turn on each other. So that is a good fit for that hole. However, I don't think it was actually metal that we were taking off with this reamer, because if we look at this, the dirt on there doesn't really look like metal shavings. It looks more greasy and oily, which, seeing as this was a brand new reamer before we started doing this, I think this shows it was mainly just old solidified grease that was in there, which seems to be the story of this tractor pretty much. Now, the next thing that we found out was this is the actual 1/2-inch bolt, and as expected, that doesn't currently fit into our seamless tubing that we've ordered, which means that needs to be drilled out slightly. And obviously this isn't the length you want to go through this section of the front axle, so we need to cut this down too. So when it comes to working out what length we need to cut it down to, over here we have a new old stock sleeve, which does the same job that we're making our seamless tubing do. And we put this on here. If we go from the 4-inch mark, that is 3 inches and 7/16 of an inch long, so just under 3.5 inches. So we checked this against our chassis using these measuring tools, and when we had this fully clamped up, we put these against here, and that was, as we'll see on the ruler, exactly 3.5 inches. Now, with how this works, this needs to be clamped tight in this front axle bracket so that the front axle can pivot on this sleeve. But at the same time, this sleeve can't be too long, otherwise the bolt won't be able to grip this bracket either, and the sleeve will still turn with the front axle. So it's quite a tight balance for the length of this, where you want it to be as far into this bracket part as possible, but you don't want it to be too long, because otherwise it will work kind of independently, whereas these need to work as one unit effectively, with this in the bolt hole in the center. So for our seamless tubing, we're going to start off with cutting it at 3.5 inches, which is the measurement that we got from tightening our one up. Then if we need to, we can reduce it to the size of the new old stock sleeve. We're now cutting our seamless tubing to size. We're cutting it a bit longer than we wanted so that we can face it off in the lathe afterwards. We have our piece of seamless tubing now cut to length, and if we use digital calipers here, you can see that that is just over 3.5 inches. So we're going to take a tiny bit off this end by facing it off in the lathe. That also makes sure that we get a completely flat surface on there, because we're not too sure how reliable our bandsaw is for making a straight clean cut. So we will set this up in the lathe now and face it off. We finished facing off our bit of tubing now, and since that is the length that we're going to start with, we now need to open up the hole, or the inside diameter of that, up to 1/2 inch. Now we've got a few 1/2 inch drills that we could use, and we've selected a couple here. This one looks to be the most accurate one that we've got. However, with it being such a long drill, we can't be sure whether it's bent or not, which is a common issue with long drills. We also have this one here, which is 12.2 millimeters, which, if we look at this conversion chart that we've printed out, which is very helpful, 1/2 inch is pretty much 12.7 millimeters. So this being 12.2 is just smaller than 31/64. So effectively this is just over 1/64 of an inch smaller than 1/2 inch. So we're definitely going to start with this. Now, to use this in our lathe, we're going to have to use a Morse taper 1:3 adapter so that we can put this into the tailstock of our lathe. So we will get this set up now, ready to put this drill through our bit of tubing. Have to use our bigger drill in the end, However, we're very happy with the fit of that on there. There's not really any movement at all on there, which is perfect, and is much better than the new old stock one that we've got. We can actually see that wriggles around a bit on there, which effectively means that the sidewalls of our new one is thicker, and that means that this should be stronger, which is good, because that thickness was kind of the vulnerability of this part from the factory that caused them all to break and lead to all of the other steering wear issues. Now what we want to do now is try fitting all of this up. Now we've already shown that goes into there nicely. This also goes into this bit nicely, as it should do, and that goes in there. As you can see, there is a tiny bit of a ledge now that I've lined it up with the back. However, that is the gap that will be closed when we tighten the bolt up. So we're going to now trial fit this before we use a nylock, since these are meant to be kind of single-use things, because you don't want to damage the nylon, otherwise there's not much point in it being there. So we're going to use a normal nut just for tightening this up and seeing how it is. Obviously we're going to have to cut for that, because it's a two-man job holding this exactly where it needs to be, which is made more difficult by ourselves making this such a tight operation and removing the wear in all of these parts. So we will trial fit this and see what results we get. So we fitted it up and unfitted it. We were very happy with how tight everything was. However, we realised quite quickly once we bolted it all up that there was no way of telling what bits were turning in what, and we don't want our tubing part turning in the chassis, because then that ovals this, and that way you can't really counter very easily. So to counter this, we got a tapered chisel, which is round up until about there, marked one end, put this in here, and then gave it a swift hit with a hammer just to open one end up slightly. So if you look here, this end fits as it did before. Okay, that's a bit better. That end fits as it did before. That end doesn't really fit anymore. So that's probably going to need hitting to get it in the final bit. However, we're confident that when that's in, that will stop this from turning in the chassis, which is effectively what we're trying to stop with this. So we're now going to put it back in and back all together, and hopefully that'll do its job. As we said before, we won't actually know, because when it's all done up you can't see what's moving, but this gives us a bit more confidence that the things we want to move will move, and the things we want to be stationary will stay that way. We have everything fitted up again, and we're happy that our piping or tubing was a good interference fit. Obviously that can't guarantee that it won't move, however that should give it the best chance to stay stationary as possible. Now we've put some copper slip or anti-seizing compound on here. Even though the bolt is plated, we just wanted to make sure that it doesn't rust in there. So I will now put this through here, trying to get the least amount of this anti-seizing compound to kind of seep out of it. Then coming around to the back, washer, and we are doing this hopefully for the final time, so this is the time the nylock will go on. And it's unhelpful. I will now tighten this up, which could take a while with this nylock. However, we'll get it to a suitable level of tightness now. We finished tightening up the bolt now, and there's absolutely no wear movement on there. Now, might be a tiny bit tight, it doesn't self-center. However, we think that's fine for the moment, and we can always loosen it off a bit if need be. We have started putting the grease nipple in the bottom here, and that just needs winding in like that, and then just quickly tighten that up the full way and fill that with grease. Then that's that center part done, and we're very happy with how that's turned out. There's absolutely no like side to side wear or anything like that in there, so that's perfect. The next thing to move on to would be putting stub axles on and putting on the steering linkage. However, we've realised that we haven't cleaned any of these parts up and they are absolutely filthy. So before the next video, we're going to give all of this a good clean up so that it's actually bearable to work with for the next video. Then next time we will put the stub axles on, connect up all of the steering linkage. Then obviously we need the wheels to be on to do the final adjustments for the kind of angle the wheels sit at. But that is a good job done, and now we have both axles back on the tractor. But that is it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.